everyone, welcome back. This time we're doing a deep dive on Kara Swisher's new book, Burn Book, a tech love story. And, Swisher's not just like some random tech person, right? I mean, she's been covering Silicon Valley like forever.
Decades.
Yeah, decades. Watching it go from like those early dot-com days to, this global force that we all kind of live with now.
Yeah, and I think what's so interesting about this book is it's coming out at a time when, everyone is trying to figure out what to do with tech's power.
Yeah.
It's affecting everything from our elections to, our mental health. And Swisher, really digs into all of that.
She does not hold back. And
Like,
she's
they're-
asking these like really big questions,
Yeah.
like, did tech keep its early promise? What went wrong? And where do we go from here? So this deep dive, we're going to give you the tools to like really understand all of that, whether you're, prepping for some big meeting or just trying to understand the headlines.
Yeah, one of the things I really like about this book is how Swisher blends memoir and history,
Mm.
She takes us all the way back to the AOL days. Remember Steve Case and Jerry Levin?
Oh, yeah.
It was such an optimistic time, but also these huge personalities that really shaped where tech went.
Oh, yeah. I'm so glad you brought that up because there's this story that I just could not get out of my head about how Swisher got her start at the Wall Street Journal.
Tommy.
She basically bluffed her way into covering tech. She admitted she didn't know much about it at first, but, she's a fast learner, clearly. And she quickly made a name for herself. You get this real sense of her, hustle and her ambition, which I think really explains how she became, this force in the industry.
That's so interesting. And it really shows how tech was changing so fast that even, experienced journalists were having to learn on the fly.
Oh, yeah, totally. And it kind of set the stage for some of the blind spots that Swisher talks about later on.
Definitely.
And this leads us to what Swisher calls the Cambrian explosion of tech. Like the iPhone coming out, social media taking over cloud computing, changing everything. It felt like a revolution.
It did. In a lot of ways, it was.
Yeah. Oh, totally. But Swisher shows us that there was this darker side developing kind of underneath all the excitement.
Right.
She uses these internal company documents and interviews to show us what was really happening.
Yeah, this is where the book gets really good. We see how the government basically failed to regulate these companies, and they just grew unchecked. It led to so many of the problems we see today.
Okay, so let's talk about techlash, because that's a huge theme in the book. You know how everyone's kind of pushing back against these companies now, they're disillusioned with the impact it's having? Swisher breaks all of that down.
Yeah, she links it to this bigger anxiety around misinformation and privacy and, this widening gap between the rich and the poor. She's arguing that tech has made all of these problems worse in ways we don't even fully grasp yet.
And she doesn't just talk generally about it. She goes into specific cases like Uber and Theranos and WeWork. These stories show how this growth at all costs mentality led to some pretty terrible outcomes.
Those deep dives into those companies are so powerful. Take Theranos. She reveals how Elizabeth Holmes, the founder, was able to basically trick investors and the public for years. She asks, how did all these smart people fall for this? And her answer is that people were blinded by this promise of disruption.
It's a huge warning about hype and why you got to think critically even when it comes to new tech.
For sure. And one of Swisher's biggest criticisms is about social media. She really goes after their whole business model, saying they prioritize keeping people hooked over their well-being.
That part really got to me. She talks about these internal Facebook documents that showed they knew Instagram was hurting teenage girls' self-image.
And yet, they didn't change anything. It raises these huge questions about ethics,
Absolutely. She explains all the tricks they use to manipulate us, like these feedback loops that keep us scrolling. It's fascinating, but also kind of scary.
It makes you think about how these algorithms are shaping our behavior without us even realizing it.
And it's not just social media, right? Swisher also gets into artificial intelligence and how the race to be the best is ignoring safety and ethics.
Exactly. And that's where things get even more complicated, because AI could be so beneficial but also so dangerous if we don't develop it responsibly.
It does feel like we're at this crossroads with AI where the potential is huge, but so are the risks.
Totally.
So what did you find most compelling about Swisher's take on all this?
Well, she uses some pretty scary examples of how these biased algorithms are already affecting things like hiring and even the justice system. She talks about how facial recognition software is misidentifying people of color way more often. And that can have terrible consequences.
Yeah, that's so important. We can't just talk about AI in this abstract way.
Yeah.
We have to look at the real-world impact, especially on people who are already marginalized.
Exactly. And those implications extend to the power dynamics in the tech industry as a whole. We got these few giant companies like Amazon, Google, Facebook, who basically control so much of our digital lives. And Swisher really shows us how that happened and what it means for everyone.
One thing that really struck me was how she uses these everyday examples to show us the problem with monopolies. Like, she talks about how Amazon gives its own products an advantage, or how Google changes search results to help its own services. It's not some abstract idea, it's affecting our choices every single day.
It's almost like we're living in this digital feudal system where a handful of tech lords control the whole online world. And Swisher argues that this stifles innovation and limits what consumers can choose from.
And it's not just about power and money, right? Swisher also challenges this idea that digital stuff is automatically green.
Oh yeah, that's a good point. She has some shocking facts about how our digital lives impact the environment. Like, did you know that data centers use more electricity than entire countries? And then there's cryptocurrency mining, which is a huge energy drain.
Wow, I did not know it was that bad. I mean, I knew our devices had some impact, but I didn't realize the scale.
And then there's all the e-waste, like old phones and computers. It's a massive environmental crisis. And Swisher thinks the tech industry needs to step up and take responsibility.
This makes me think about how that move fast and break things attitude that Silicon Valley was so proud of has really backfired.
Swisher tells this great story about a company that had this huge product launch, but they totally forgot about shipping and distribution. They ended up with tons of unsold products that had to be destroyed, which is a huge waste.
It just shows how prioritizing speed and growth over everything else can lead to these unintended consequences. And not just environmental ones, right? It contributed to all those ethical problems we talked about, too.
Absolutely.
Mm.
And Swisher doesn't let them off the hook. She says they have to start thinking more holistically, considering ethics and society, not just profits.
So let's talk about Swisher's writing for a minute. She's known for being this sharp, no-nonsense journalist, but this book is more than that. I felt like I was getting this inside look at Silicon Valley while learning about all these complex issues.
She's really good at blending her personal stories with deep analysis of the industry and how it affects society. She calls it a braided narrative, and it really works.
I loved how she uses those personal anecdotes to make these huge, complicated topics feel relatable. Like, that story about bluffing her way into tech makes her seem human, even while she's taking on these tech giants.
And she's not afraid to use dialogue, humor, even moments where she's vulnerable. It makes the book so engaging and memorable. You're not just getting facts and figures, you're getting a feel for the personalities and the culture that built Silicon Valley.
It definitely doesn't feel like a boring tech book. So how do you think this book connects to the conversations we're having right now about tech's role in our lives?
It's super relevant to what's happening right now. It has implications for all the big debates, like how to regulate big tech, develop ethical AI, protect our privacy, even how to deal with the climate crisis.
I mean, we're seeing lawsuits against tech giants, worries about mental health and social media, and even China becoming this tech superpower. These issues are all connected, and Burn Book helps us understand how.
It feels like Burn Book is this wake-up call.
Yeah.
It's pushing us to really think about the tech we use every day and demand more from the companies that make it.
Yeah, you know what really struck me is that for all the criticism, it's also a love story. Like, Swisher loves technology and she's excited about what it can do, but she's not afraid to point out the problems.
It's like tough love for Silicon Valley.
Right.
And I think we need that right now because the stakes are so high.
For sure. It's not just about gadgets and apps. It's about the kind of world we want to live in, the kind of future we're building. And technology is going to be a huge part of that.
I'm curious what really resonated with you. Was there a story or an argument that you just couldn't stop thinking about? Honestly, it was that story about the company that had to destroy all those products because they didn't think about shipping. It's just such a clear reminder that this focus on growth and disruption can have real consequences, not just for the planet, but for people's lives too.
It reminds us that there are actual human beings behind all of this, and our choices have a ripple effect.
Right. And Swisher isn't just blaming people. She's offering solutions too. She highlights companies and people who are doing things differently, who are thinking about the long-term impacts of their work.
She's saying we don't have to just accept things the way they are. We can demand better from these companies, support innovators who are thinking about ethics and sustainability.
Exactly. And that's what I hope people take away from this deep dive. It's not about hating technology. It's about being informed and engaged, being citizens who are shaping the digital world we want.
So if you're even a little bit interested in tech or how it affects basically everything, Burn Book is a must-read. It's a wake-up call, but it also gives us a path forward.
It actually left me feeling hopeful. Like we can learn from the mistakes and create a tech landscape that's fairer, more sustainable, more human.
I think that's a great note to end on. So what did you find most thought-provoking? What are you going to do with this knowledge? Tell us.
Share your thoughts. Start conversations. And let's keep pushing for a better tech future. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, it does feel like Burn Book is kind of this call to action, to think critically about the tech we use and what we expect from the companies making it.
I agree. And you know what struck me is even though she's critical of the tech industry, it's obvious she really cares about it. Like she loves technology, she's fascinated by what it can do, but she's also not afraid to say, hey, this isn't working.
It's like she's giving Silicon Valley some tough love.
Yeah, exactly. And we need that because it's not just about, phones and apps. It's about the kind of world we want to build for the future. And the technology is going to play a huge role in that.
So what about for you personally? Was there anything in the book that really stood out to you, like a story or argument that stuck with you?
Honestly, it was that story about the company that had to destroy all those unsold products because they messed up the shipping. It's just such a good example of how this obsession with growth can have real consequences, not just for the environment, but for people too.
Right. It's a reminder that there are people behind all this.
Yeah, and Swisher doesn't just point fingers. She offers solutions too.
Yeah.
Like she talks about companies and people who are taking a different approach,
Yeah.
who are thinking about the long-term impacts of what they're doing.
She's saying we don't have to just accept things as they are. We can demand better from these companies. We can support the people who are prioritizing ethics and sustainability.
Exactly. And that's the message I hope people get from this deep dive. It's not about hating technology. It's about being informed. It's about being involved in shaping the kind of digital world we want.
So if you're at all interested in tech and how it affects everything, Burn Book is a must-read. It's a wake-up call, but it also gives us hope and a way forward.
Yeah, it really does. It left me feeling optimistic. Like we can learn from our mistakes and create a better future for tech. One that's fair, sustainable, and, puts people first.
I think that's a perfect place to wrap things up. So tell us what you thought, what really made you think, what are you going to do with all this new knowledge?
Share your thoughts. Start conversations. Let's work together to create a better tech future. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
And we'll see you next time.